So, first thing I have to ask is, do I have your permission to record?
Yes, Marcus. I'm happy to record this interview.
Okay. So, on the phone with me right now is Rikha Havini. He was the 1995 representative delegate of the Bougainville interim government to the United Nations Indigenous Peoples Council. He's also son of Moses Havini, who was legendary in the Bougainville Independence movement. What's interesting is that while here in California we were talking about the impeachment of Donald Trump, in November and December, Bougainville was having the vote of their lives, where they were literally talking about if they wanted to become independent, I think for the first time in 100, 200 years. And 98 point, I want to make sure I get this right because this was incredible. The Bougainville Independence referendum from November to December of 2019 had a approval rate of 98.31%. Rika, am I getting any of that wrong? What sort of background key points would you like people to know about you? Did I mispronounce anything, sir?
No, that's fine. My name's Rikha. Look, yeah, I've been part of the journey to Bougainville since older nappies. We've all got a heritage involving Bougainville, and I'm a product of race marriage. My mother is an Australian teacher who went up to Papua New Guinea in the 60s and so fell in love with Moses Havini, who was one of the first university students studying law at the University of PNG. So when the political process of PNG to gain independence in '75 began, the leaders of Bougainville, the chiefs, were calling back their educated sons and who were in university to represent the cultural concerns for Bougainville's own self-determination. So I was in nappies by the time my mum and dad were heavily involved in the self-determination movement for Bougainville. We're going back to the early 70s at that time.
Wow. Wow. Yes, according to what I was looking at here, 1975 was a pivotal year. Marilyn Havini, because she was a citizen of Australia, was able to move the family to Australia, I believe, in 1990, where the family and Moses Havini worked remotely for independence in a country that, conceivably maybe he didn't know he'd ever see again. Now, fortunately, as I understand, he was able to go back in 2005, but for 15 years to be working for independence of a country you don't know if you're going to go back to. That's incredible. And you had a firsthand seat to that. I know that you were in nappies. That means like being a kid, right? Or early youth. But could you just
Absolutely.
could you describe for us who weren't there? You're watching what we would call a George Washington fighting the battle that's done now in the modern era. Back then they used muskets, but now your father was using. I think he was basically talking to everybody he could, every newspaper, any ambassadors he could get a hold of, and any UN uh, people he could talk to. Is that right? Could you tell us a little bit about this 15-year period of fighting for independence and what was your did your father have a plan? Uh, what was that plan?
Well, first of all, it was a decision for my parents. Four of us children. The war in Bougainville is just starting to get worse and worse. The PNG had declared a state of emergency for Bougainville, and
Okay.
there
Okay.
was shooting streets. Essentially, the war had started in the streets in the towns, and people were leaving Bougainville, getting on planes, just parking their cars at the airport, leaving the keys in the car and just getting on the plane back to Australia or wherever they came from. And fortunately for my mother, being an Australian woman, we're mixed race family. I'm half Bougainville, half Australian. So we landed in Sydney, Australia, and we lived at my grandmother's house. And for that entire period, my father had to find out how he could contribute. And they were always communicating with the people on the ground. And so my father was one of the original political leaders of Bougainville when they formed the North Solomons provincial government. This was the period when PNG gained independence. The Bougainvilleans had pushed back and said, we're not Papua New Guineans, we're part of the Solomon Islands, and we're not going to, stop pushing for our own self-determination. So my dad was one of the original leaders of, just a handful of 5 men that originally were part of that original team. So in Bougainville, they were communicating with each other, and the only thing we could do was use the phone, use the fax, and communicate through the Solomon Islands, HF radio, and the other leaders on the ground to kind of organise themselves with an identity which became the BIG, the Bougainville government. And this is essentially the original Bougainville North Solomons provincial government leaders in the jungle, hiding from the PNG army, the guns, the bullets, the choppers, and the car packs. So when the war increased, the atrocities were getting worse and worse. My father knew he had to do something. So here we were in Sydney. I was in my last year of high school, and we went to complete our high schooling in Sydney. And then one of the front rooms of my grandmother's house became the office of the Bougainville Freedom Movement.
I love it.
We had to communicate with the world. There's only so many ways to do that because two things occurred. The strategy was to create a naval blockade around Bougainville, and so there was no way to get goods and services in or out without gunfight. And secondly, in Australia, for one, there was a government ban on report on the crop Bougainville, and that meant that the ABC, other news corporations, the journalists were told you cannot report on this situation. It's an internal matter for Papua New Guinea.
Oh my God! Oh wow! Okay.
So,
yeah. Okay. Not the first time I've heard that story, but please go on.
Yeah. So what we had was the beginnings of a civil war with the Bougainville Revolutionary Army, which was essentially just the landowners who took up arms to push back these Papua New Guinean soldiers who were highly equipped with modern weapons from the Australian government. And there was a lot of atrocities even before we evacuated. The power of the gun. It was just an empowering thing. I saw it for myself. Walking through the streets of Bougainville, and at the time, the atrocities that had to be reported. So immediately we knew there was a human rights case, and we had enough contact with certain lawyers to tell us that we needed to lobby at the United Nations in Geneva about the human rights plight for Bougainvilleans. The thing was that with the blackout of news, journalists were in two minds about reporting on it, because if they really wanted to do it, they had to fly into the Solomon Islands, get on a small boat, and run the blockade through the coal boat and the helicopters. But journalists started to do that, and they came to my father, and in Sydney, they would interview him there for as much information as they could. And that became a source of information for the whole world. And my father quickly found that if he could put out a news release or a press release, it would quickly get taken up. And so media started to come to Sydney and to communicate with my father for interviews on radio. So that was the beginning of what was then. What was the Bougainvilleans offshore, rebel office my mother's a school teacher. She's the one earning the breadwinner and putting us through school. And Dad is on the phone, on the fax, talking to Jim day in and day out.
Yes. Okay. More. I love that rich detail. I just it's incredible because um, your father seemed to be a very intelligent man. I saw some of the essays he put together, but it doesn't strike me as he had a master plan. It strikes me as he was a man reacting to a horrible situation, doing the best that he could, and he managed to pull off what is damn near impossible for most countries that try to do independence. And
Well,
that's just that's incredible.
the hardest thing for Bougainville is we have a very rich culture. We have our own language. In fact, we have several languages, uh, and, uh, and a culture that tells us who we are. We have laws, customs, and traditions. We always have had our own identity, but we've been under the control of the colonial era, the neo-colonial era, and Bougainville has always pushed back, even before World War One, World War Two, when the colonial forces jockeyed for control of the resources in the South Pacific.
Right.
And what we see now, even with the current situation, we've had our referendum, we've waited patiently for what was an amazing outcome,
Right.
with a 98% vote for independence.
Right.
And now we have
0.31%.
we've got a bigger geopolitical situation, which certain governments want to call a potential crisis, where Australia's own national security plan involves having strong diplomatic ties and trade with the South countries to the north. And you've got the Chinese moving in and making deals with various Pacific islands. And so we've got the Americans concerned about the threat to America and Hawaii from the Chinese if they were to establish a stronger presence in the South Pacific Islands. So there's this territorial imperative that's always overshadowed Bougainville. It doesn't matter if it was 100 years ago or today. The Bougainvilleans simply want independence. They want to right the wrongs of the colonial era. And then we've got this, again, I suppose, territorial imperative overshadowing everything that the Bougainvilleans are trying to achieve.
Let me ask you about that. I was going to ease into the interview, but since you've gone into the geopolitics of it, I think that's the pivotal question. So I'm going to read for you two quotes from the Sydney Morning Herald in an article talking about your dad and and your mom, and it was a very good article, and it did a pretty good job, and it said your parents worked very hard and they were able to achieve a lot. However, the Sydney Morning Herald said this: Bougainville was unable to get the other countries to recognize its Declaration of Independence when it was made originally. And although victory had little meaning if no country would recognize the winner. Will Bougainville get international recognition from perhaps China or Australia or New Zealand? I think you're saying some people are worried about Bougainville becoming independent. Or will Papua New Guinea allow Bougainville their right? I mean, I'm with you. Everybody has the right to vote for their government. That's the principle of democracy. It goes back to Plato and Socrates. It's very clear. But we live in a geopolitical time, as you mentioned. What are the prospects for the future? Do you believe the independence can work out something and get international recognition and be welcomed as a nation? You're there. You're connected. What are you seeing, sir?
All right. Well, my opinion is based on what my people think. It's not just my opinion. When I travel in Australia and Bougainville, And when I'm home in Bougainville, you feel the heartbeat of the people. Everybody feels the same. And we know one thing, that the Western countries, the democratic processes, if they are not exercised within the true meaning of their values, they are worthless.
Thank you.
We have lived under I would say, an iron fist colonialism. Our resources, we've got some of the wealthiest resources, copper, gold, and the extractive industries that have come in throughout the colonial period have been there for one thing, and that's to take our resources and keep us under, this tight control. So when these great countries like Australia and America and New Zealand and England and Europe, when they espouse these values of democracy and, that they're such good countries, that doesn't mean anything to the Bougainvillean when they're told that you can have a referendum and you can vote and you can have a standing result for self-determination, and then get told, again and again through the Bougainville Peace Agreement, that the PNG government does not have to ratify their referendum vote for independence.
Right.
So, knowing that, when every Bougainvillean man and woman and their children, when they get told that, right, all it does is make them more determined to fight back. And that is not exactly the way we want to achieve independence, because that means military conflict. And we've had enough of that. And when you talk about, whether or not the United Nations and the countries that get to vote and the countries that can veto a vote for independence, when we have to go to that political gauntlet to wonder if all of these major countries will support a Bougainvillean movement for independence, or whether or not one of those countries, whether it's Britain, Australia, America, or China, or whichever, if they veto the vote, the Bougainvilleans aren't going to change their attitude. And just like during the actual war itself, the Bougainvilleans weren't trained soldiers, but they were indigenous, people living as best they could in a fairly affluent place in Pacific, where we had one of the largest copper and gold mines. Bougainville in the 80s was a very, in comparison to any other Pacific state, was an affluent place. But when you come in with an invasion, they just want to fight back. And what we've had for the last 20 years is an amazingly successful, peaceful process of coming out of the conflict and, standing up an autonomous Bougainville government, trying to demonstrate political competency in terms of, managing local government. And so when we have to face the people with their 98% vote have to go and face another gauntlet, all it's saying to them is your democratic standards mean nothing. So there's a very important situation arising internationally, because there's been so much focus on Bougainville's referendum. We know that, we know the story with East Timor and East Timor's process, and it did get and the Bougainville, actually the Bougainville rebels, they haven't taken their guns in. And at the same time, for the last 10 years, they haven't used it. So we've seen a very strong culture turn around and say, all the young men who became rebel fighters say, we're going to tuck our guns away, put them away, we're going to listen to our chiefs, we're going to listen to our local government members, we're going to let the police carry on their duties and demonstrate the ability to provide, a justice, a law and order justice system. And they've done that amazingly. The desire for peace in Bougainville is amazing, but the international community should not underestimate the attitude of Bougainvilleans to fight for what they've already fought and stuff. So, but the main thing is, how can these big countries talk about being champions of democracy? If the Bougainvilleans have to go after this amazing vote, gauntlet at the UN or through the PNG government and get told, no, you can't go there.
So I'd like to ask you now. I'm sure you watch the news. There's a country called Spain in Europe. And in Spain, there's a country or a new country that wants to be called Catalan or Catalonia. And the Catalonians said, we live in a Western democracy. Spain, Europe, very democratic. And we would like to have a peaceful vote for independence. And then the Spanish government sent in soldiers and beat their people down and threatened people with machine guns and took away their ballots and arrested their leaders and jailed other people and shut down their newspapers. And England and America said nothing. Does that encourage the world to believe that the West is actually about democracy, or really just about democracy for themselves and when it benefits themselves, and it's really just wordplay? How do you feel about that?
Well, that's our direct experience. We've got, first of all, if you want to talk about desire for sovereign statehood, and we're talking about that in the context of a modern world where you have to get recognition from the UN. We have our cultural identity. We have customary laws. We have a political system in place. We have very basic economic institutions. And to a very limited extent, we've achieved international relations. I personally went to the United Nations in Geneva in 1995, and I went there on a mission on my father's request during a peace talks being held in miles on New Zealand's naval vessels. And I carried photos of massacred children. I took photos. I carried these photos, which smuggled out of Bougainville to the UN, and I walked into these halls of power. I had no idea what I was. I didn't speak the language, and I walked into the courtrooms at the UN in Geneva, and I spoke to judges at the door, and I showed them photos, and they asked me where I was from, and I said Bougainville. They'd never heard of Bougainville. And I explained the basics, and Rwanda had just happened in '94. There was this massive genocide.
Wow.
And
wow.
I didn't, at that point, I didn't ever point, see genocide as the next big issue. But I got bounced from referrals from one important person to the next important person until I was sitting in front of the Assistant Commissioner of the UN Human Rights Commission.
Nice.
And I got whisked down the hallway in Geneva at the UN. So in front of this very important man in America. I poured these photos of these massacred children, these deaths. They did some maths. They asked me the population of Bougainville, how long the conflict had been going for. By 95, that is about 7 years. And they said, this is genocide. So you're talking about countries like the Australian government, Australia, America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, all turning a blind eye to genocide being committed in Bougainville.
Is that what it was?
Actually,
you're saying it was genocide?
And it was called genocide in that office at the I'm talking about the UN High, Assistant High Commission for Human Rights.
Wow.
And I walked out of the UN building with an assurance that the UN would then be sending a special representative investigator to the government of PNG to challenge the government of PNG on the potential case of genocide, which did occur as part of the early successes in terms of bringing about a ceasefire and peace. It's stopping the war. Because once Papua New Guinea was in the headlights, so to speak, by UN on account of genocide in Bougainville, the United Nations could not ignore this situation, and nor could the politicians in Canberra, the government of the day in Canberra, Australia, in New Zealand. They were then put on notice that the UN had now established a case of genocide was being committed in Bougainville. So, if the Spanish military want to go into Catalonia and disrupt and prevent those people from having a democratic process, the Bougainvillean people, we never even got the chance until we fought for it. And what you have is a 10-year period of ugly guerrilla warfare, a lot of misery and struggle by families living in the jungle, trying to stay out of the range of the heavy weapons of the PNG soldiers, and just fighting a war of self-defense. The Bougainvilleans didn't go and invade Papua New Guinea. They're surrounded by an island. So the Bougainvilleans they had to do one thing. They had to fight back. They had to somehow, as an untrained person, take on a professionally trained PNG soldier, capture their weapons and fight back. And the only thing that my people know that works, it's not democracy, it's called fighting back. And when you've got enough men, adequately armed and can stand on the battlefront and push, an invading PNG military unit back off the hill or back to the beach, that's the only thing that worked. So the Bougainvilleans have only got this referendum because they fought and so one thing's for sure, as much as we don't want any more fighting, and I can assure you I'm very, very, very close to the Bougainville rebel commanders of that time because my father was part of their team. These guys are my heroes. I'm not going to show you that we wouldn't have had this referendum if we didn't fight back. And that's the saddest truth. I think that's history. I think everyone understands, anyone who studies history knows that if you don't fight back, they're going to walk all over you and they're going to you and beating you with, this colonial attitude toward Indigenous people.
So for all this talk about democracy and the United Nations and equal rights for everybody, here are democracies looking the other way when a people want to have a right to vote for their own determination. It's not the first time I've heard that story, and it scares me, frankly, because I see that in Catalonia, I see that in Scotland. They too said, "Hey, can we have a vote?" And they were told no. And I worry about places like Bougainville, and I worry about places like I think it's called New Caledonia, with the Canucks, and your story seems very the original Greeks. I understand you're saying it's about being able to fight back, but that story should appeal to the Western mind. Here were the Greeks, they were farmers, and they had to fight on an island against a much larger force, And all they wanted was to be left alone because they had a unique
Right.
culture. And
Yes.
the entire Western concept of democracy is based upon that story. And it's your story. I would think that you would have more champions in the Western world. Um, so what's the plan for the future? What can Bougainville do, or advocates around the world who support Bougainville having the right, or anybody having the right to have a vote for their future? I see the key is that you need to have international recognition, definitely support from Australia, New Zealand, and maybe China and America for you to do that. Is that part of the plan? What's the next steps? How do you get it to make sure that the Papua New Guinea government does the right thing?
The original Bougainvillean political movement, just when Australia was about to give Papua New Guinea independence in 1975, the original Bougainville political movement declared a UDI, a Universal Declaration of Independence. They raised the flag, the Bougainville flag, and they experienced what the people in Catalonia experienced. The riot police were sent in. You know, the women, Indigenous women, of course, um, lying down in front of bulldozers. The mining company was developing the ports, the roads between the port and the mine. And the women would throw themselves in front of bulldozers, and they would protest. They'd put their life like they'd always said, "You have to kill me to take my land." So there was always this spirit of of discrimination, which was always expressed through the early Bougainville leaders. My father was one of those, because they had they were the first graduates from public university, and so they declared the Declaration of Independence. It was ignored. But it had some success because the newly formed Papua New Guinean government understood that there was a much greater risk of conflict at that time. So they sat down, well, how about if we give you your own provincial government? So you've got your own, essentially, a state of the country. And that occurred. Bougainvilleans then enjoyed a period of prosperity because of the money, because of the modern infrastructure, the roads, the airports, and the schools all flourished during the 80s. And so it seemed like the people had been appeased with employment. Bougainvilleans would work in the mine. They could drive a truck, or an excavator. And Bougainvilleans enjoyed the ability to go to good schools, which was all brought on by the wealth of the mine. But at the same time, the rest of the island was controlled by Australians, whether they were entity or individuals who pretty much carved up the island, all the original plantations for cocoa and copra. And so there was a period there as well where Bougainvilleans refused to work for wages on their own traditional land or an Australian plantation owner and so forth. And when the crisis started, that was not just because of all the political issues. The mining in itself had caused an immense amount of environmental damage to the people where the mine is located, and also downriver where the tailings were pushed. So the conflict itself was started simply by peaceful actions where the landowners protested to the local government, community government, mining company, Bougainville Copper Limited. And so once that got out of hand, the war began. The rebel leader up in the Panguna mine in Francisona declared another UDI. And all Bougainvilleans in that area fondly cherished those dates because they pushed the PNG army off the island, but actually retreated back to Papua New Guinea for a couple of months. And the Bougainvilleans raised the flag again and declared a UDI. Now, again, when you're surrounded by blockade, no one's listening. So there wasn't going to be any political recognition from that second UDI. Now, we've had a referendum in 2019. The common attitude that I understand, having just come back from Bougainville, is that if the PNG government refuses to ratify to vote for independence, if the UN, if other countries refuse to demonstrate any proactive participation in recognising Bougainville's referendum vote, then the collective of the current standing Bougainville politicians will declare another UDI. And at that point, if democracy is important to the democratic nations of the world, then there must be a new source of support from countries around the world. I don't know who will be first to recognise a UDI in Bougainville, but the budget is determined to follow the process, and they're not going to take a backward step. I can guarantee you that. I know the attitude of my people.
Well, let me ask so I think what you're saying is the people there are dedicated to independence, and they'll just keep filing a Declaration of Independence until they get the world's attention to do the right thing and recognize that it's a people asking for a right and asking for recognition from democracies. Let me ask you one question. So you were saying that the 1980s was a pretty good time. I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but jobs, the economy was booming. Seems to be a favorable period, and that was when Bougainville had some form of autonomy, but it was still connected to the PNG government. And I believe it was the Sydney Morning Herald was suggesting that, well, I know it's not right, but that the Papua New Guinea government has said, we recognize the vote and we're committed to a long-term roadmap. And the Sydney Morning Herald's going, well, commitment to a long-term roadmap sounds good. Peaceful roadmap sounds good, but it's not the same thing as saying, I recognize Bougainville independence. And the Herald said maybe, this is them speculating, the PNG government would try to do a Quebec in Canada, Scotland before the full devolution vote, sort of a sovereignty light, not full independence, but heavy independence in a sort of quasi, like Quebec. Is that something Bougainville people would go for, or definitely not at all?
No, absolutely not. One thing that the Bougainville, in the last during this peace process, the last 20 years, right? Papua New Guinea itself has struggled with the economy. PNG, we would like to say on a very basic level, is broke. PNG has had a multitude of multinational corporations in PNG extracting oil and gas, copper, gold, and other resources. But the curse on PNG is corruption. It's a corrupt government. The people of Papua New Guinea themselves, I've had more face-to-face Papua New Guineans tell me that they want Bougainvilleans to succeed with independence, because if our people can turn around these curses, this corruption, then we'll give them a precedent to do something for themselves. I can assure you that you go to the PNG, jump in a taxi and talk to anyone on the street, and they will tell you PNG is a very corrupt country. And Bougainville doesn't need Papua New Guinea to succeed. Papua New Guinea is broke, and they have been, if you follow the news in the last 2 months, have been asking for financial assistance from Australia, financial assistance from China, and that is to supplement their budget. So at the same time, we've had the same mining company, Bougainville Copper Limited, backed by Rikha, and numerous other companies trying to negotiate back in to Bougainville to take over the mine. There is so much in Bougainville. Bougainville can economically sustain the needs of the island and its people, whilst in a parallel effort developing their agricultural economy and their fishing resources. But they're constantly pushed back by these small political elite groups that are, as far as the people are concerned, owned by corporations. And one thing that people don't understand about the Bougainville War is that the crisis in Bougainville, the loss of revenue from Bougainville Copper Mine, essentially sent the PNG government broke. And this is something that I wrote about and talked about PNG's desperation in getting financial aid from the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Asian Development Bank, and it was during the mid-90s that PNG had a number of national crises like a tsunami, a volcano eruption, together with the corruption of the political elite. They sent PNG broke at the same time. These extractive resource companies were making billions and billions of dollars. So they need Bougainville resources. All Bougainville and sea, when PNG says we're not letting you go, should we cut a deal, is their desperation. And it's also driven by Australia's national security plan, because Australia's national security plan, if you learn any lessons from World War II when the Japanese invaded PNG and the Solomon Islands, Australia depends on stable government, friendly governments in those northern countries, because that's the first line of defence for Australia's national security.
Right.
So PNG's policies are based on Commonwealth policies, which go to Canberra and go back to London. And so all they're doing is being overshadowed by the same territorial imperative. The Bougainvilleans themselves can manage their resources. They can get onto the world stage as much as any of those smaller Pacific neighbours who are already independent, like Vanuatu. Actually, there is islands further down the South Pacific island chain. They're approximately 300,000 people population, and they're an independent country. Right. And they don't have anywhere near the one island, which is Bougainville. So Bougainvilleans know they can do it. But it's just that constant, corporate and neo-colonial control over the territory and the resources.
It's the year 2020, and we're still having a predominantly Caucasian-run organization. And I'm half white like you, and I love my dad. And he's a great man. And my mom's full-blood Mexican, and it was awesome being mixed. But it's incredible to hear a story that it's the year 2020, and the dynamics of predominantly Caucasian countries through the fancy legal systems that they constructed, which, yes, do protect rights, and I'm glad that they're here, but still allow for predominantly brown-skinned countries to be economically exploited and the people left in perpetual poverty. We're still seeing a system invented, in 1820? Here in 2020, 200 years later. That's just incredibly depressing. I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I can tell you that the West used the system and the models of democracy that have been adopted, whilst there's there's certainly a clear, uh, proven, uh, 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 case to say that democracy in the system works. You're superimposing a Westminster system based on governmental systems in Europe, and you're imposing over an indigenous culture that has its own customary law, and it's a clash. And so what happens is you've got the educated and the uneducated. You've got the Papua New Guineans, the Bougainville who make it through high school, make it to university, become educated, and they, by default, become the politicians and leaders. The uneducated, they stay in the villages, they live traditional lifestyles, but they can't understand the complex modern Western systems if in another language, which they don't use as much as they use their own dialects. So that the educated people in Bougainville or Papua New Guinea or other countries in the Pacific, they are the ones doing the deals with the corporations. They're getting their economy started, but the corruption goes with it. And so you have a political elite, and the people in power enjoy the benefits of that. They know that the indigenous people who have their own resources, they make do. You can go into the village and you cannot stop because they've got their land, they've got garden, all the fruit and veggies, they can catch fish in the sea, and people live quite well except for testing modern medicines and other modern products. But you've got this political elite as well that is used by the neo-colonial forces, the transnational corporations that come in to do business. And, they'll wine and dine and they'll pay off politicians. And the deals are done. So the corruption that's occurred over the last 20, 30 years in Papua New Guinea has simply broke. And that's just evidenced by the fact that billions of dollars are going out of PNG every year, but the government's hand out the money. So something that a lot of people don't know is that during the 90s, during the Bougainville War, the PNG government, the kingdom currency actually crashed. That was a serious problem for Papua New Guinea. They had to go to the World Bank, the Asian Bank, they had to go, the IMF, and had to borrow money. And in return, those banks had to say to PNG, how are you going to pay that money back? And so the next thing was what we call structural adjustment loans. And so PNG was forced to sign up to structural loans where to have that fiscal injection of money to keep the country running, they had to allow access to the mining companies, to the oil and gas companies to come in to get that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay. Nice.
So PNG is heavily debt and has had to allow all these blue chip companies, BHP, Rio Tinto, Chevron, there's numerous mining and oil and gas companies that are in mining and extracting simply because the banks and the international community demand that the PNG government demonstrate fiscal competency, and that could only be relied upon if you enter in these big companies who know what they're doing. So the structural adjustment loans haven't finished. They have to pay back banks. So in that kind of vacuum, the political elite they've said, well, I might as well get rich on the way. Every single Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea has walked out of office as a millionaire. You talk to any Papua New Guinean, they'll tell you what's that. And so Bougainvilleans know, because when we saw this happening in '95, we lobbied at the UN. We lobbied the Australian government because with that injection of money, the government could have spent money on military. And that's exactly what came about when Sir Tidley Chan hired a British army colonel who set up a private military company, a PFC called Sandline, hired South African mercenaries and bought Russian helicopter gunships and bought, Soviet bloc military hardware and started to train an invasion force in '95 to go into Bougainville and try and beat the PNG rebels because the PNG government couldn't do it. So the money was spent. It was, in excess of $30 million US on weapons of war to kill people, to carry on genocide. So we were lobbying against these factual justice claims, so we were trying to get some kind of action to make sure that the PNG government had clauses where they couldn't use that money to buy military hardware. But that was never going to happen because a bank can tell a sovereign state that they can't defend themselves. And so what we see there is the banks support multinational companies, Papua New Guinea, the money being spent on mercenaries to seize control of Bougainville to gain control of the Panguna copper mine.
Yeah, Western countries. Yeah. I hear you. I'm committed to Western ideals and democracy, but it's a really hard sell when you see so many hypocrisy, so much irony. I mean, I'm half Mexican. The Mexican side is Tejano. So what that means is they were Mexican in Texas before Texas became Texas. They were a bunch of Mexicans, and then Caucasian people came in and they said, "This is Texas now, and you're all Texans." And no one asked the brown-skinned Mexicans there if you want to be Texans. So I had family who never got their citizenship papers because they said, "You never allowed us to vote. You didn't ask us. And if we had been outvoted, that might be one thing, but you didn't even ask." And it's just sad. I'd like to tell you a real quick story, and then I'd like to ask your opinion, if that's okay. So we talked to Poka Lanui. Poka Lanui is with Hawaii Independence, and he talks about the colonization of them too a lot. And it's a very similar story. And he had talked to some of the people on New Caledonia, the Kanaks. And, Hawaii was conquered by America. New Caledonia was conquered by France and, Papua New Guinea and Bougainville, Australia, Japan. So this is the story he told me. He heard this from a Kanak person when they were talking about their independence movement against France. So it's the 1800s, and the Kanak are still living in their traditional ways. Two Frenchmen come up to a Kanak's house. It's a hut, very beautiful, but very, very easy going. It's a grass hut. It's not very complex, but it's well kept. And so the Frenchmen say, "Can we come inside and check out your hut? We're just kind of curious." Now, in the Canuck culture, they too have a traditional culture, and you're supposed to be friendly to travelers. So he says, "Come on in. You can take a look at the house." So he lets them see his house, and the Frenchmen take off. So the next day, the Canuckman, he goes fishing. He leaves his house. He goes to get some food. While he's gone, the two Frenchmen come into his house, and they go, "Well, we were allowed in yesterday, so it's got to be okay for us to come in now." And they go, "You know what? I really like this guy's bed." And they sleep on his bed. And they go, "You know what? I really like his kitchen." And they start cooking his food. And then the Canuck guy comes home, and he goes, "What are you guys doing here?" And he goes, "Well, you invited us before. We thought it was cool." And he goes, No, it's not okay. And the Frenchmen say, the two Frenchmen to the one Canuck guy in his house say, well, let's have a vote about it and we'll do the democratic thing. Thoughts, feelings?
Mm.
See, it's democracy can be used to keep people down sometimes, or what appears to be democracy.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's not a. It's not a cultural system of in Bougainville. We don't have a democratic system culturally. We have we have our own. They are in place. They are working, but they don't interface with the imported Western laws. So what you have is educated, Bougainville, get in, it gets up, goes to work, a local government job, gets paid, he enjoys having a career. And when he knocks off job, he goes home to the village. He enjoys village time. I'm in the village, and I'm just going to enjoy not having any stress of work. When the son gets back to work, he has to switch up work in a government system that essentially the system. So when the chiefs have got issues, they need to represent their people and their land and resources. They go to the government. The government says, "Oh look, we can't talk about it your way. We're going to have to go and see the Minister for of Education or the Minister for Health, and have to make a statement. And each ministry's got a budget, and so we'll provide goods and services. And when it comes to industry, when the multinational corporations come in, they're not talking to the chief who says, no, you can't take my garden and my site, that's where I grow my food. The corporation goes to the government of the day, goes to the mining minister and says, this is good for your country if we open up that mine, and then that, the indigenous politicians in his political seat, he's following that mechanism. Okay, right, how are we going to get the chip to agree to this? You put this immediate conflict because the extraction of resources in Bougainville has never been fair. It has never been a balanced, deal. The indigenous people have never been considered or treated as equals, ever.
Right. Right. That was the story that I heard when I did an interview with the Hawaiians. And he told me that was the story with the New Caledonians. And I know that it was the story with the Mexican people of California when the Americans came in. It's just a repeated story. Land's taken over, and the people who live there aren't given a fair vote. And then they say, well, you're part of this country now.
The hardest part that I see is in a democratic system, you stand up to be a local member for your people. You want to get the most votes. You want to be the elected representative in government, and you want to be the one leading the people through progress and change. But in our culture, we have a pecking order. We have existing laws. They're not written down. They're not sitting in the library in England or Canberra. They've always been there. Everyone wants to stand up and be politicians. It creates this dividing effect amongst the community. And it comes down to bribing your way in power. And that's one of the reasons PNG, the corruption is unchecked, because it becomes a power struggle is going to be the next president or the next minister for your region. And the methods of corruption in PNG have become quite sophisticated. For instance, I was home and I interviewed several people who were doing previous election campaigns. And the ballot boxes, they'd go to China or Indonesia, have the ballot boxes made, and they would have the electoral poll, and they would have the people in the electoral would have the ballot box filled with the votes, then shipped back into the country, and then that's how you read an election. That's how some of these political leaders get landslide victories, because they're using money to use offshore printing companies to make the ballot boxes, fully filled votes, and then smuggle them back into the country and switch them over. And I'm telling you that that's a hearsay story, but I am telling you that I know people personally who were told that's what they would have to do if they join that certain political party. So electoral rigging and corruption,
Wow.
it's tribal. You've still got this tribal competition,
Wow.
and corruption is just seen as another tool to get power. And so, from what I see, the whole purpose of a democratic process is the value of it is completely diminished because of electoral rigging, bribes,
Yeah.
all of the practices are ingrained in PNG and have been for decades. And you can go into the street and ask someone if Rikha is telling the truth. No, they agree. That's very good. It just happens.
Yeah.
So how can you have a democratic process that's worth anything if electoral rigging and bribing is the most favoured method of getting into power?
Oh man, I mean it's 2020. I'm just not. Would I be wrong to not be full of hope for the future? I mean, it still seems like the same old problems just aren't getting better. Is there a
I can only say the Bougainville referendum was, I think, the most well-managed voting process or democratic process in Papua New Guinea ever. Bertie Ahern, the ex-Irish Prime Minister, you had that international third-party support to lead the process. There was UN observers, there was international observers from countries. The whole process was a transparent process, and that's the hope that Bougainville will say those were the standards that we used the last time we voted, and those are the standards we want in the future. But to push through to get those standards, the current political elite in Bougainville, in Papua New Guinea, they have got too much to lose. And so you've got this current situation in Bougainville where the president who served 2 terms is trying to change the Bougainville constitution to be able to enable a president to run for a 3rd term. And now the whole of Bougainville, social media, I've seen the attitudes. I don't see any single social media comment that's in favour of it. There are local leaders, there are the political factions in that are saying this must not happen. 2 terms is enough. The Constitution has been designed to provide a democratic process, not empower a corrupt or political elite to, foster what we call a dictatorship.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't talk to the people. They talk to the multinational corporations. They talk to the foreign affairs departments in various countries because of the geopolitical posturing going on, and they're playing the tune of these neighbouring countries because of their own geopolitical imperatives and the will of the people, and that's a recipe for disaster because those rebels have not handed in their guns.
Yeah, yeah, yes. It reminds me of the Irish Republican Army in the 1970s. They before there was the violent IRA in Ireland, there was a peaceful movement, and I believe the town was Derry, and the Irish were peacefully protesting through Derry, demanding a vote and more independence. And the English gunned them down, and it's pretty bad. And the leader of the protest, who was an Irishman who was committed to freedom for his people, but he was equally committed to nonviolence. And I saw the movie, and he goes up to the British officer and he goes, "We have both lost. Both of us. You're going to send troops over here and they're going to die, and my people are going to die too. And I was trying to do this peacefully, and you just blew it for all of us." And that was how the movie ends. And I thought, wow, he was right. He was right. We allow people to pursue peaceful, organized pathways. Maybe not, independence in a year, maybe take 5 years over gradual transition time, but you let people vote and determine their future. Or we're going to have a future where countries talk a big game about democracy and they really don't do it. And the rest of the world sees through it and sees them as nothing more than hypocrites. And I hope the Western world figures that out before it's too late, because I see countries like the Philippines and Turkey and Hungary. And 10 years ago, they were pursuing democracy. And now, they're not as enthused. And what they're saying is, you guys are hypocrites. So why am I going to follow your system? That's bad for everybody.
Yeah. And I would say that when you asked about the question of hope, the best demonstration of that will conduct of all of the Bougainville groups. They have, by and large, maintained the peace and allowed a justice system to grow and operate in Bougainville after 20 years, when they stood there and told by the PNG government, supported by the Australian government, that you could have a referendum in 10 to 15. Can you imagine how people felt then? Because that won a military victory. Nevertheless, the Bougainville people and their rebel leaders have lived peacefully in Bougainville for 10 years, and up until last year, participated in a peaceful referendum with an outstanding of 98% vote for independence. So, the Bougainvilleans themselves are demonstrating to the international community that they are not trigger happy, that they are not bandits. They stick for their human rights. They achieved what they needed to do, and they are committed to a peaceful political process, which, with a peace-building focus, has allowed the international community to support the successful referendum. So the most constraint is being done by the Bougainvillean people.
Huh. That is something to, it's beautiful. Everybody listening should check out the Bougainville Independence referendum of 2019. It was peaceful. It was democratic. Like you were saying, there was multiple observers making sure that it was fair, and it was a tough thing to do. Am I not mistaken? That was a lot of hilly areas, a lot of undeveloped areas. They really had to take their time to make sure everybody got a chance to vote, and they got out to everybody. Is that right?
Absolutely, and to them, there was a 2 week voting process. I went home. I voted, and then to the Prime Minister of PNG flying in, and I understand he's got a job to do to protect his own sovereign borders, but for him to turn around and say to people, but please, we know 98% of you want to break away into independence, but please don't. Let's come up with a solution. It is like the insults of insults after waiting 10 to 15 years to vote to then be told that we don't want to secede from Papua New Guinea. So they are simply Papua New Guinea, and I know that Canberra Australian policy has been by and large supporting of Papua New Guinea for deferred to not give Bougainville independence. All they are doing is consolidating the spirit of Bougainville to continue fighting and to fight forever.
Okay. Well, this is a rich topic. There is a lot here. And I think that we are talking at a moment where the future has a lot of possibilities. But I feel this is the transition point. Big transition point. It's been coming, I think, for decades. I think your father was around. He saw it. And now you're here. And we're not sure where it's going to go. And I think the what Bougainville and the independence movement that you're dealing with are the factors they're dealing with are world factors. I feel we're going through kind of an independence era right now, whereas as a global people, we will feel this out. Um, so let me, to start winding it down, let me ask you, Rikha Havini, how can people get a hold of you? How would you like to be contacted? Is there websites that you would like people to look at?
Look, I'm not in any political role whatsoever. I'm simply I'm a product of the independence movement through my parents. We all have an opinion, and we all care. At home, they will have elected people in government, and they represent their constituencies. I'm in Australia, and I go home frequently to vote, and I participate at a local level in my own village, in my own clan, at a local level in support of the development of our own area. But I'm not an elected person, and I don't have a mandate politically to speak on behalf of people. They've got the place, whether we love them or hate them. We want a democratic process. I have not entered the political stage. My personal career in Australia, I've had to take different jobs. I've had careers in Australia, but my greatest desire is simply go home, Bougainville, and watch my people get independent, be happy, develop their own economy, and manage their own futures. So for me, this is the first interview I've given to a journalist ever, and
Thank you.
it's a decision I still need to sit on with regard to whether or not it's the right thing to do. In Australia, we built the Bougainville Freedom Movement, the BFM, and we have a moderator of the Bougainville Freedom Movement, and she's a lovely Australian woman who mustered amazing support during the 90s. There were so many Australians who, when they realised that their taxpayer dollars were funding bombs and bullets and helicopter gunships and naval patrol boats to go into Bougainville and kill innocent people, those Australians started to demonstrate. The Bougainville Freedom Movement was formed in Sydney, Australia, and the Bougainville Freedom Movement was made up of Australians, of Aussies, who were going to their own members and saying, why are my dollars killing people in Bougainville? Why are my taxpayer dollars funding a genocide in Bougainville? So the Bougainville Freedom Movement was the beginning of the movement for my mother and father, so Marilyn and Moses Havini. And they got this amazing support from ordinary Australians. And that's what it took to make the politicians in Canberra. Because the journalists then had a story to tell. So that was a peaceful way of using the voice of people, of people power that can't even look. So there are many Australians who followed the Bougainville crisis and cared about this situation and were angry. I was coming of age at that time. I would watch my dad every morning when the fax machine started whirring. Back in those days, we used fax machine. And the battle reports would come through from Bougainville via HF radio, Bougainville down to the capital of Solomon Islands and Honiara. And Martin Miriori, who was one of the outspoken leaders of that time, who was still quite outspoken in Booker, in Bougainville, he would send the battle reports and the casualty report on fax to his father, and then the journalists could then start to interview my father about the most current situation in Bougainville. So that was a depressing time, because imagine having to wake up in the morning to see about 33 metres of paper, roll that on the lounge floor, and you read every single paragraph saying 6 people were killed here, women were raped there, these people were decapitated, a church was bombed by Albo and attended, or 1500. And sometimes the information was weeks or months old. And that took a big toll on my father, because every morning when he read that fax paper, we all got up in the morning and said, who's going to read this fax first? It wasn't something we looked forward to.
Yeah.
We get up out of going to the office in the kitchen home and say, Dad, there's some faxes have come through. You might want to read this. But that was what it took. Unfortunately, it took genocide to wake up the world that the Bougainvilleans were being persecuted, and all they were doing was defending their own landed resources from Western imported law. Whether it's Rio Tinto or these mining companies, they own the land. We were always told the Queen of England owns your land. You, through common law, you can bury people, you can dig a hole up to 6 feet and bury someone. But if we find copper and gold or oil below that belongs to the Queen of England, that belongs to the Commonwealth, that belongs to the government. And you can't do that to Indigenous people who don't even know where England is, who've never seen the Queen, and who mostly don't speak English. You can't tell Bougainville people that kind of thing. They don't even know where. When you're playing land, they don't even know which direction you came from. So look, I don't have a mandate. I'm not speaking politically, but I was willing to be interviewed, and I dare say if it helps my people, I'll be interviewed again.
I understand you're being very proper. You're not taking on titles that you don't have, and I respect that. I would point out, though, that Bougainville is very remote And don't leave it up to the news to get it right. You speak English and you have a direct connection to that place. Don't rely on the Western media to make sure that your people's story is told correctly. And I think be like your father. Do interviews, talk to people, keep making sure the story's out. You're not saying what people feel. You're saying, hey, go talk to the official government. I'm just telling you the culture of the people, the emotions of them. I would not leave it up to the Western world to make sure that that is reported correctly or well enough or intensely enough. Um, just a personal opinion. And I think with that, you should do interviews. You're good. You know the story. It's personal. You were there. And you believe it. And you're from there. That counts. That means a lot. I've played this journalist game a little bit. You got to make sure that your talking points are out there, because they'll misinterpret, they'll get sloppy, or like you said, somebody with money will get to them.
I tend to agree. And I think there is a time and a place, and it's an evolving situation, and we do have a responsibility to speak. So I do appreciate your kind words. And look, if you can tell your believable story, and if people want to listen, then hopefully the world's leaders are going to listen to accounts.
I'm going to share it around. Okay, any last comments? I'll end the recording here, and I'll send you and everyone else a copy. Give me a day to get it together. Last thoughts, last things you'd like the public to think about. You won't see them for a while. What is it you want them to take away? What is that thought that you want them to keep going? Oh yeah, that guy from Bougainville, he said that, and I still remember that, and I can't get it out of my head. What is that thought, sir?
Well, the main message that Bougainvilleans want to tell the world is we are independent. We own our land. It's our land. And the only way you can take it off us is to forcefully invade our shores. There's the number one belief amongst Bougainvilleans is we have to adopt Western imported laws. We have to perform on the world stage. We have to negotiate with countries who, quite frankly, would walk all over us to take our resources. And so in return, when the Bougainvilleans take the next step, we want world leaders to take into consideration the customary rights of our inheritance. But those rights aren't just a great story to be told in some history book, to end up in the National Geographic magazine. That's how we manage resources, our lives, and our plans. We want world leaders to respect Indigenous people's rights and interests, because we are, we are inhabitants of our land. There is no one else there to impose something else on us. Colonialism. Our people, we're not going to give our land away to extractive industries to simply extract all these minerals so everyone can have computers, waves, and cars. That is not our priority. To give away our land to extractive industries and end up with nothing. So we need to be self-determining and manage our land, or there is nothing for us. The the world level simply put gun in our heads if they think that we're simply going to roll over and accept a situation where the Commonwealth countries, England, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, to start with Papua New Guinea, which is a Commonwealth country, ignore these snacks and Bougainville Independence. They're basically asking us to commit suicide, and we're not going to do that. But England are going to fight for their rights, customary land holders, their resources, and their territorial borders. And that is the one thing people need to understand. We're never going to stop fighting for our human rights.
I love it. Okay. Well, we'll end it there, and I will send you a copy soon. If you know anyone else with Bougainville Independence or any other independence movement, I would like to talk to them because I wasn't just saying that to say it. I don't trust mainstream news to get all the stories out and get it correct. I met a lot of great journalists. There are a lot of professionals out there, a lot of real pros, but you want to make sure it's done right, you got to jump in yourself. All right. Thank you, Rikha, and I will email you tomorrow morning, sir.
Well, thank you, Marcus. I enjoyed your and I appreciate your interest and passion for our plight for Bougainville.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, I believe you guys have the right, and I see a pattern. We're in an era where I hope we get it right, and we recognize that we will be stronger as a world if we respect people's rights to vote for their future and self-determination. Okay, that's it, and I will send you an email tomorrow morning, sir.
Okay, thank you, Marcus.
All right, all right.